The canine lunged in a flash of teeth and instinct, slamming a man to the cold concrete as screams filled the gas station. They called the dog dangerous. They called the woman beside him a violent ex-soldier who'd lost control. But what happened in the next 8 seconds would decide whether an innocent K9 was destroyed, or whether a buried truth finally came to light. One restored video, one courtroom, and a line of veterans who refused to let one of their own, and her dog, be erased twice. What the evidence revealed didn't just clear a name. It exposed years of lies, power, and a system that silenced those who served. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from. This is not just a story about a dog. It's a story about loyalty, honor, and justice that refused to stay buried. The snow had started falling before dawn, slow and quiet, the kind that made a Midwestern town feel smaller than it already was. By the time the sun tried to rise over Hawthorne Ridge, the streets were already covered in a thin white layer that muffled sound and erased footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. The wind moved between old brick buildings and rusted street signs, carrying the smell of cold metal and distant pine. It was the kind of morning that made people stay inside. Emily Carter didn't have that luxury. She stepped out of her small rental house just before 5 a.m., pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. She was 34 years old, average height, lean from years of military conditioning that never quite faded. Her dark blonde hair was tied back in a low, practical knot, the way she used to wear it under a helmet. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes, not from age, but from long stretches of squinting into sun, dust, and danger. Her face carried a calm seriousness that made people uneasy. Not unfriendly, just guarded. Beside her stood Rex. Rex was a German shepherd, nearly 9 years old, larger than most of his breed, with a thick black and tan coat dulled slightly by age and scars hidden beneath fur. His ears stood alert, but not stiff, one bearing a thin notch from shrapnel years ago. His amber eyes were intelligent, watchful, and tired in a way that mirrored Emily's own. He sat close to her left leg, shoulder brushing her knee, not by command, but by habit. Rex had been a military K9 once, a tracker, a protector. Now, according to the county records, he was classified as potentially dangerous. Emily clipped the leash onto his collar. The metal clasp clicked softly. Rex flinched. It was subtle, just a tightening through his shoulders, a brief lowering of his head. Emily noticed immediately. She rested her hand on the back of his neck, fingers pressing gently into familiar fur. "It's okay," she murmured, not as an order, but as reassurance. Rex exhaled slowly. The neighbors across the street watched from behind their curtains. They always did. Mrs. Dalton, a thin woman in her late 50s with tightly permed hair and a permanent look of concern, pulled her grandson back from the window when she saw Rex. She had once been friendly to Emily, before the rumors, before the police reports, before the whispers of that woman and that dog. Now the sidewalk emptied when Emily walked down it. Emily worked the night shift at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, moving boxes, checking manifests, speaking to no one unless necessary. It paid just enough to keep the lights on and the county fees current. She had learned not to argue with silence. Rex walked beside her, matching her pace, nails crunching softly against ice. Every so often, a passing car sent a sharp metallic sound echoing through the street. Loose chains, a rattling exhaust, a clanging trailer hitch. Each time, Rex's ears flattened. His breathing changed. Emily adjusted her grip on the leash without looking at him. PTSD, the vet had called it, as if giving it a name made it lighter. The town knew Emily as the ex-soldier who lost control. They knew Rex as the dog that might snap. No one asked how they'd survived before they arrived here. They reached the small park at the edge of the neighborhood, little more than a frozen playground and a patch of trees. Emily usually avoided it, but the snow had erased most tracks, and Rex needed the space. She unclipped the leash. "Stay close," she said quietly. Rex didn't run. He never did. Instead, he moved in slow, deliberate circles, nose low to the ground, reading a language older than words. His posture changed, not playful, not relaxed, but focused, working. Emily watched him, arms crossed, breath visible in the cold. That's when Rex stopped. His head snapped up. His body went rigid. Emily followed his gaze. At the far end of the park, near the trees, something small moved against the white ground. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then it cried. A child, a little boy, maybe 6 years old, bundled in a red jacket far too thin for the weather. His gloves were mismatched. One boot was half buried in snow. Tears froze on his cheeks as he turned in slow, confused circles. Emily's stomach dropped. Rex didn't wait for a command. He moved forward, careful, controlled, not charging, not barking. Emily followed at a jog. "It's okay," she called out gently, lowering herself as she approached. "You're okay." The boy looked at Rex first. Fear flashed across his face, then hesitation. Rex stopped 3 feet away and sat. Perfect posture, calm, non-threatening. Emily knelt beside him. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Tommy," the boy sniffed. "Hi, Tommy. I'm Emily, and this is Rex." Rex lowered his head slightly, eyes soft. Tommy reached out without realizing it, fingers brushing Rex's fur. "My mom went to the store," he said. "I followed, and then I couldn't see her anymore." Emily closed her eyes briefly. She pulled off her gloves and wrapped them around Tommy's hands. "You did the right thing by staying here," she said. "We'll find her." Minutes later, the police arrived. Officer Mark Jensen stepped out of the cruiser, a man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes and a permanent crease between his brows. He had known Emily in high school, had known her before. He looked at Rex first, then at Emily. "Control your dog," he said, automatically, hand hovering near his belt. Rex didn't move. "He found the kid," Emily replied evenly. The boy's mother arrived moments later, sobbing with relief. She hugged her son, thanked the officer, and then hesitated when she noticed Rex. Her gratitude faltered. She didn't thank Emily. She didn't look at Rex again. Officer Jensen cleared his throat. "County's been getting complaints," he said quietly, "about the dog." Emily nodded. She already knew. Rex sat at her side, snow collecting on his fur. As they walked home, Emily felt the familiar weight settle into her chest. Not anger, not sadness, but something heavier. The sense of being judged without being heard. Inside the house, Rex shook off the snow and lay down near the door, facing it automatically. Guard position. Emily leaned against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. "You did good," she whispered. Rex rested his head on his paws, eyes never leaving her. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering tracks, hiding evidence. But scars, some things, never stayed buried. And somewhere in town, people were already talking. The snow had stopped by the time night fell, but the cold deepened, sharp and unforgiving. Hawthorne Ridge looked different after dark. The quiet streets felt narrower, the streetlights harsher, their yellow glow reflecting off patches of ice like watchful eyes. Emily Carter drove with both hands steady on the wheel, Rex lying on the passenger side floor the way he always did, his body angled slightly toward her, alert but restrained. Emily's shift at the warehouse had ended late. Her shoulders ached, and the fatigue sat behind her eyes like a dull pressure she had learned to ignore in worse places than this town. She hadn't planned to stop anywhere, but the fuel light blinked on just as she passed the last intersection before the highway. The gas station stood alone on the corner, fluorescent lights buzzing, the kind of place that felt more exposed than safe at night. She pulled in. The station was nearly empty. One pump flickered, its digital numbers lagging. Inside the small, convenience store, a tired clerk leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. Outside, the wind pushed loose trash across the concrete in scraping sounds that made Rex lift his head. Emily shut off the engine. "Stay," she said quietly. Rex obeyed, but his muscles tightened. His ears angled forward, tracking movement Emily hadn't noticed yet. She stepped out, the cold biting through her jacket, and began pumping gas. The smell of fuel mixed with winter air. She was halfway done when she heard footsteps, fast, uneven, coming from behind the building. Her body reacted before her thoughts did. She turned. The man was tall, broad in the shoulders, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. His movements were erratic, too close, too fast. There was something in his posture, aggressive, off balance, that made Emily take a step back. "Hey," she said, voice firm but calm. "Stop right there." He didn't. He lunged. Rex burst from the car in a blur of motion and sound, the leash snapping tight as his full weight hit the end of it. His bark cut through the night, deep and commanding, not frantic. He struck the man low and fast, shoulder into thigh, knocking him sideways before teeth ever touched skin. The man hit the concrete hard, gasping, arms flailing. Everything happened in seconds. "Get back!" Emily shouted, bracing herself, pulling Rex just enough to keep him controlled. Rex stood over the fallen man, body rigid, chest heaving, eyes locked, placing himself squarely between the threat and Emily. He did not bite, he did not advance. He held position. The clerk rushed outside, phone already raised. Another car slowed at the edge of the lot, headlights illuminating the scene. Someone shouted. By the time the police arrived, the story had already begun to change. Officer Mark Jensen was not the first on scene this time. Two younger officers stepped out instead, hands resting on their belts, eyes flicking immediately to Rex. "Ma'am, step away from the dog," one of them ordered. Emily complied without argument. Rex stayed where he was, sitting the moment she gave the signal, posture straight, eyes forward. Blood trickled from a cut on the fallen man's forehead where he'd hit the pavement. "He came at me," Emily said evenly. "My dog intervened." The man groaned, rolling onto his side. "She sicked it on me," he slurred. "I was just asking for help." Phones were out now, angles chosen, context lost. Within hours, the video hit social media. It didn't show the man running. It didn't show his lunge. It showed a German shepherd hitting a man and a woman standing behind him, calm, controlled, unreadable. The caption spread faster than the truth ever could. "Dangerous K9 attacks civilian. Ex-soldier loses control again. Emily was arrested before sunrise. Rex was taken in a separate vehicle." The holding room at the county station smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Emily sat with her hands cuffed in front of her, spine straight, jaw clenched. She answered every question. She raised her voice at no one. Across town, Rex was led into the Hawthorne Ridge Animal Control Facility, a low concrete building that echoed with barking and metallic clatter. The officer who handled him, Diane Miller, was in her early 50s, heavyset, with kind eyes dulled by years of seeing animals at their worst and humans at their most careless. She moved cautiously, respectfully, recognizing training when she saw it. Rex walked without resistance. Inside the isolation kennel, the door shut with a sharp clang. Rex flinched hard this time, but once inside, he did something that made Diane pause. He turned, sat squarely facing the door, and remained perfectly still. Guard position, protecting something that wasn't there. He refused food. Hours later, at a small apartment across town, Hannah Brooks sat cross-legged on her bed, laptop balanced in front of her. She was 23, slight, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and perpetually tired eyes behind cheap blue light glasses. A second-year law student, she worked unpaid internships, read case law at night, and followed local court pages more out of habit than hope. The video autoplayed on her screen. Something felt wrong. Hannah rewound it, slowed it, paused at the edges. She noticed the abrupt cut, the missing seconds before impact, the way the audio jumped unnaturally. She frowned, leaning closer. "That's not right," she murmured. She searched deeper, clicking through alternate uploads, lesser-viewed posts. Buried in a comment thread, she found it. A raw clip, shakier, longer, barely watched. It showed the man running. It showed the lunge. It showed the dog stopping, not attacking. Hannah sat back, heart pounding. At the gas station, the manager, Caleb Wright, a lean man in his late 30s with a permanent nicotine stain on his fingers and a talent for avoiding responsibility, sat in his office staring at the security monitor. He'd been warned before, about the blind spot, about the broken camera angle. He deleted the backup file anyway. In the kennel, Rex remained seated, eyes fixed on the door, ears twitching at every distant sound. Diane watched him through the glass, a knot forming in her chest. "That's a good dog," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Outside, the town slept. Inside, the pieces were already moving. The interview room at the county detention center was colder than it needed to be. Not just the air, but the walls, the table, the silence that pressed in from every direction. Emily Carter sat with her hands folded in front of her. No cuffs this time, posture straight despite the stiff plastic chair. She had slept maybe an hour since the arrest, not from fear, but from the constant awareness of what might be happening to Rex in a place she couldn't see. The door opened quietly. Hannah Brooks stepped inside, clutching a thin folder to her chest like a shield. Up close, she looked younger than her 23 years. Slim build, pale skin, dark hair pulled back too tightly, as if trying to look more serious than she felt. Her eyes, though, were sharp, curious, the kind that noticed details other people skipped over. "I'm not your lawyer," Hannah said quickly, almost apologetically. "I'm a law student, intern. I saw the video." Emily studied her for a long moment. "Which one?" she asked. Hannah swallowed. "The one that didn't go viral." That was enough. They talked quietly at first. Hannah explained how she'd found the uncut footage, how the missing seconds changed everything, how the narrative online no longer matched reality. Emily listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable, but her shoulders eased just slightly for the first time since the arrest. "There's something else," Hannah said, opening the folder. "Your name came up before. Not here, in another case. Different state." Emily's jaw tightened. "Same pattern," Hannah continued. "Private security contractor involved. Civilian incident. Pressure to accept responsibility fast. No trial." She slid a printed document across the table. The logo at the top was unmistakable. Blackridge Security Solutions. Emily didn't touch the paper. She didn't need to. "They were contracted overseas too," she said quietly. "Logistics, perimeter support, oversight they never really had." Hannah leaned forward. "So it's the same company, then and now?" Emily nodded once. "And the same tactic." Silence settled between them, heavier this time. Finally, Emily spoke again. "You want to know what the cameras didn't catch?" Her voice was steady, but something underneath it had begun to shift. "They didn't catch the first time Rex saved lives." The memory came back the way it always did. Not all at once, but in fragments. Heat, dust, noise that never really stopped. Afghanistan, 4 years earlier. The outpost had been nothing more than concrete barriers and tents hammered into dry ground. Emily, younger then, sharper around the edges, had been a K-9 handler attached to a patrol unit rotating through volatile territory. Rex had been 3 years old, powerful and fast, coat gleaming under layers of dust, eyes alive with purpose. The mission was supposed to be routine, route clearance. Local intel suggested minimal activity. Rex had disagreed. "He stopped dead," Emily said, staring at the tabletop. "Wouldn't move forward, wouldn't respond to redirect commands. Just planted himself." The patrol leader had hesitated. Seconds mattered out there. Emily had trusted the dog. She'd signaled halt. The IED detonated anyway, far enough ahead to spare them, close enough to remind everyone how narrow survival could be. Shrapnel tore through the air. 3 soldiers went down, wounded but alive. Rex dragged one of them by his vest out of the open ground while Emily applied pressure. With shaking hands, she forced to stay steady. "He wasn't trained to do that part," Emily said. "He just knew." She stopped speaking for a moment. Her breathing changed. "He saved all 3 of them," she finished, "and no camera ever showed it." Hannah didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Hannah sat in her car outside the detention center, laptop balanced on the steering wheel, refreshing a search result that wouldn't leave her alone. Someone had commented on one of the still images of Rex circulating online. "I know that dog." The message came from Daniel Ruiz, a former Army engineer now living 2 states away. Mid-30s, broad frame, dark hair cropped short even years after discharge. According to his profile, he worked construction and volunteered at a veterans center on weekends. They spoke on the phone that night. "That's Rex," Daniel said without hesitation. "German Shepherd, scar on the ear. He pulled Sergeant Collins out after the blast. I remember because I thought he was going to break his spine doing it." Daniel's voice cracked briefly before he caught himself. "That dog shouldn't be in a cage," Hannah added his statement to her growing file. Meanwhile, Rex remained in isolation. The kennel lights buzzed softly overhead. The concrete floor was clean, cold, unforgiving. A stainless steel bowl of food sat, untouched, near the back wall. Rex sat facing the door, spine straight, tail still, eyes tracking every footstep beyond the glass. When a worker passed wearing a reflective vest, the metal strip on the fabric caught the light, and Rex's ears flattened, breath hitching before he forced himself still again. He did not lie down. Across town, Emily's public defender dropped off a copy of Rex's training records, retrieved after Hannah insisted they mattered. The file was thick, worn, its edges softened by time and handling. Page after page documented consistent evaluations, controlled responses, high discrimination threshold, zero unprovoked aggression. One note stood out, underlined in red ink years earlier. K9 reacts only when handler or unit is under credible threat. Emily traced the words with her finger. That night, alone in her cell, the walls finally quiet, the weight of it all pressed in. Not the charge, not the possibility of prison. The thought of Rex being destroyed because someone needed a scapegoat. Her control fractured. She sat on the narrow bed, elbows on her knees, hands covering her face as a sound escaped her that hadn't in years. Not loud, not dramatic, just raw. Tears slid down her fingers, silent and unstoppable. "I can take it," she whispered to the empty room. "I can take it, just don't punish him." Outside, the cameras kept rolling, showing angles and moments and versions of truth that fit neatly into boxes. Inside, the truth was messier, alive, waiting. The hearing was scheduled for 8:30 in the morning, early enough that the courthouse halls still smelled faintly of floor cleaner and stale coffee. Winter light filtered through tall windows, pale and indifferent, casting long shadows across the polished stone. Emily Carter sat at the defense table beside her public defender, shoulders squared, hands folded neatly, as if posture alone could anchor the uncertainty churning beneath her calm exterior. She wore a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit her frame. The sleeves were a little short, the shoulders a touch too loose. Still, she wore it with the same quiet discipline she had once worn a uniform. Her face was composed, eyes forward, unreadable to anyone who didn't know her well. Behind her, the gallery was nearly empty. At least, it was empty at first. The first man entered without ceremony, slipping into a seat along the back wall as if he were just another observer. He was in his late 40s, medium height, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and a posture that never quite relaxed. His name was Dr. Michael Adler, though the court paperwork would list him simply as a civilian witness. In another life, he had been a combat medic, deployed to multiple forward operating bases, the kind of doctor who learned to work with limited tools and no margin for error. War had left him with a permanent limp and a habit of scanning rooms automatically, but it had also hardened his belief in truth over convenience. He glanced at Emily once and gave the smallest nod. 10 minutes later, another figure appeared. Captain Laura McKenna, retired, former K9 unit commander. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with steel gray hair cut short and a face weathered by years of sun and responsibility. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes carried the sharpness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She chose a seat 2 rows behind Adler, crossing her arms, waiting. Emily didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel them there. The hearing began as expected. Procedural language, summaries of the incident, references to public safety and potential threat. The prosecution spoke confidently, leaning on the viral video and the fear it had stirred. They framed Rex as unpredictable, Emily as negligent at best, dangerous at worst. Then the defense requested permission to introduce additional witnesses. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses perched low on her nose, hesitated only a moment before nodding. Dr. Adler was called first. He walked to the stand with a measured pace, his limp more noticeable up close. He spoke clearly, calmly, explaining his background without embellishment. When asked how he knew Emily Carter, his answer was simple. "She saved my life," he said. A murmur rippled through the room. Adler described the Afghanistan incident, the explosion, the chaos that followed. He explained how Emily had worked through incoming fire, how Rex had dragged wounded soldiers out of danger, how decisions made in seconds had meant the difference between evacuation and body bags. "The dog did not act randomly," Adler said, looking directly at the judge. "He acted to protect, exactly as trained." Captain McKenna followed. She stood straight, hands clasped behind her back, voice firm without being loud. She spoke of Rex's training record, his evaluations, his controlled temperament. She spoke of Emily as a handler who never cut corners, who trusted her dog and earned that trust in return. Then she introduced the document she had carried in her briefcase. A report, once classified, now declassified. It detailed the civilian incident that had ended Emily's military career. It outlined conflicting accounts, missing footage, oversight failures quietly buried under bureaucratic language, and woven through it all, the involvement of a private contractor whose name appeared again and again, Blackridge Security Solutions. The courtroom grew still. "This report was altered before being entered into Emily Carter's permanent record," McKenna said. "Key witness statements were removed, context was stripped, responsibility was reassigned upward and outward." She paused. Emily Carter was made convenient. Across the room, a reporter lifted her head, fingers freezing above her keyboard. While testimony unfolded upstairs, Rex was led into a different room entirely. The behavioral evaluation chamber at the county facility was stark and functional. Padded walls, observation windows, a long strip of neutral flooring. Rex entered on a loose lead held by Thomas Keene, a behavioral assessor in his late 30s with an athletic build and a careful, methodical demeanor. Keene had worked with police dogs before. He respected them. He trusted patterns more than assumptions. Rex's coat had been brushed that morning, but his eyes were tired. He scanned the room once and then sat, automatically aligning, himself near Emily's empty chair. When she wasn't there, he oriented toward the door, always guarding. The test began with controlled stimuli, raised voices, sudden movement. Rex remained still, alert, but calm. His breathing stayed even. Then a volunteer entered, wearing padded sleeves and neutral clothing. He moved awkwardly, exaggerated, playing the role assigned to him. Rex watched, but did not react. Keene nodded. "Proceed." The volunteer reached into his jacket and withdrew a rubber knife. Rex's body changed instantly. His ears flattened, his weight shifted forward. A low growl vibrated through his chest, not wild, not panicked, but deliberate. He did not charge. He did not break position. He warned. When the volunteer froze, lowering the prop, Rex stopped growling immediately, posture returning to neutral within seconds. Keene exhaled slowly. "That," he said quietly, "is discrimination." Back at the courthouse, the afternoon session brought a subtle shift in tone. Questions grew sharper. The judge's gaze lingered longer on certain documents. The prosecution's confidence wavered as inconsistencies surfaced. Outside, cameras waited. By evening, headlines began to change. Not accusations, questions. New evidence raises doubts. Was the K-9 misjudged? A soldier's past revisited. Emily sat alone in a holding room afterward, exhaustion settling deep into her bones. The door opened briefly. Her attorney stepped in, eyes alight with cautious hope. "You're not alone anymore," he said. Across town, Rex lay in his kennel, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed for the first time since his arrest. Diane Miller watched him through the glass, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Outside, the winter sky darkened, clouds heavy with the promise of more snow. Inside, something long forgotten had stirred. Loyalty, memory, and the quiet power of those who refused to disappear. The courtroom was full in a way it hadn't been before. Not loud, not chaotic, but dense with attention, as if every breath mattered. Wooden benches creaked softly as people settled in, reporters lining the side wall with notebooks ready, cameras banned, but anticipation thick in the air. Emily Carter stood at the defense table, hands folded, spine straight. She wore the same borrowed blazer, now pressed and carefully buttoned, her face calm in a way that came not from confidence, but from resolve. Rex lay beside her. He was allowed in the courtroom under strict conditions, his leash held loosely by Captain Laura McKenna, who sat just behind Emily. Rex's body was relaxed but alert, his head resting against the toe of Emily's boot. His breathing was slow, steady. To anyone who understood dogs, it was the posture of absolute trust. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Across the aisle sat the prosecution team, flanked by representatives from the city. And, further back, a man in a tailored gray suit who did not introduce himself. He was tall, late 40s, silver hair combed neatly, his expression composed to the point of coldness. Richard Hale, Regional Legal Counsel for Black Ridge Security Solutions, had not been subpoenaed. He was here to observe, to measure risk, to protect interests. The trial began with the video. This time, it was the full version. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered to life. The grainy footage showed the gas station in its entirety. Emily stepping out of her car, Rex visible through the open door, the quiet moment before the disruption. The man appeared from behind the building, his pace quickening, his body angling directly toward Emily. There was no ambiguity. The courtroom watched as he grabbed her from behind, yanking her backward hard enough that her balance faltered. Only then did Rex move. Only then did he strike, low, controlled, decisive. The sound of the man hitting the concrete echoed faintly through the speakers. Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. The prosecutor stood slowly, face tight. "We acknowledge the extended footage," she said, choosing her words carefully. "However, the force used—" The defense attorney rose before she could finish. Marcus Ellery was in his mid-30s, average height, thinning hair, sleeves always rolled just past his wrists. He didn't look like a man built for dramatic moments, but his voice carried when it mattered. "The force used," Marcus said, "was precisely what the training dictates." He approached the jury, holding up a thick binder. "Military canine doctrine is not about aggression. It is about timing, proportionality, and threat discrimination. Rex did not attack. He intervened." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Rex without pointing. If he had attacked, that man would have required stitches, surgery, hospitalization. Instead, he walked away with bruises and a fractured ego. The judge nodded for him to continue. Marcus called the next witness. Samuel Price, the gas station clerk, took the stand reluctantly. He was in his late 20s, thin, with hollow eyes and hands that shook slightly as he adjusted the microphone. He avoided eye contact at first, staring instead at the wood grain of the witness stand. "I deleted part of the footage," he admitted, voice low. Not the main file, just the backup angle. A murmur spread through the room. Why? Marcus asked. Price swallowed. My manager told me to, said it would cause trouble, said the guy who fell, that he'd been arrested before. Violent stuff, didn't want that connected to the station. Price glanced briefly toward the back of the courtroom, where Richard Hale sat motionless. I couldn't sleep, Price continued. I kept seeing the dog's eyes. He wasn't attacking, he was protecting. The prosecution objected weakly. The judge overruled. Next came Officer Daniel Reeves. Reeves was early 30s, clean-shaven, his uniform crisp. He sat stiffly, jaw tight, as if bracing himself. When asked about the investigation, his answers were precise, professional, until Marcus asked one final question. Did anyone suggest you overlook evidence? Reeves hesitated. The pause stretched. Yes, he said finally. I was advised, informally, that pursuing certain angles might complicate matters. By whom? Reeves exhaled. A superior. He mentioned external pressure. The courtroom was silent. Richard Hale shifted for the first time. The defense rested shortly after. Emily did not testify. She didn't need to. The jury had seen enough. As closing arguments began, Marcus stood once more, voice steady but firm. This case is not about fear. It's about responsibility. Emily Carter did what she was trained to do: assess, protect, de-escalate. Rex did exactly what he was trained to do. To punish them for that is to punish discipline itself. He glanced down briefly at Rex, then back at the jury. We ask you not to confuse restraint with violence. The judge recessed the court. As the jury filed out, Emily finally allowed herself to look down. Rex lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting hers. She rested her fingers lightly against his fur, just behind his ear. I'm here, she whispered. Rex did not move. He stayed pressed against her foot, a silent anchor. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered, already revising headlines in their minds. The air felt different now, lighter, less certain of its old conclusions. When the jury returned, it was faster than anyone expected. Everyone stood. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with careful posture and tired eyes, cleared her throat. We find the defendant not guilty. Emily closed her eyes, just for a second. Rex exhaled. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Honor, long delayed, had finally been heard. The snow returned quietly, the way it had on the morning everything began. But this time it felt different, softer, less heavy. Hawthorne Ridge woke beneath a pale winter sun, rooftops dusted white, sidewalks marked with careful footprints that no longer felt hurried or afraid. Emily Carter stood outside the courthouse steps for a long moment after the verdict, the cold air filling her lungs as if she were learning how to breathe again. She looked the same as she had weeks ago, same lean frame, same steady eyes, but something fundamental had shifted. The tension that once lived permanently between her shoulders had eased, replaced by a cautious, unfamiliar calm. Rex stood beside her, leash slack, head lifted. His coat gleamed after a proper grooming, the notch on his ear catching the light. When someone passed too close, he did not flinch. He simply adjusted his stance, alert but composed. People noticed. They didn't step away anymore. The restoration of Emily's military record came through quietly, without ceremony. A formal letter arrived first, heavy paper, official seals. It stated what should never have needed stating. Her discharge had been unjust, her service honorable. No apology followed. None was expected. For Emily, the words themselves were enough. She placed the letter in a plain folder and set it on the small shelf beside her bed, next to Rex's old service tag. Rex's recognition came differently. The county announced it publicly, perhaps hoping to correct its own image. A brief statement acknowledged Rex as a K-9 who had acted with discipline and restraint under credible threat. A plaque followed weeks later, modest in size, mounted on the wall of the animal control facility that had nearly ended his life. Diane Miller stood beside it during the unveiling, eyes misting as she rested a hand briefly on Rex's shoulder. "You showed them," she whispered. Rex accepted the attention with quiet dignity, tail low, eyes searching only for Emily. The idea for the center began as a conversation at Emily's kitchen table. Coffee went cold as plans took shape, hesitant at first, then steadier. A small warehouse on the edge of town, long abandoned, became available for lease. The paint peeled, the roof leaked. Emily saw potential where others saw work. The Hawthorne Ridge K-9 Recovery and Training Center opened 3 months later. It wasn't large. 2 training rooms, a fenced outdoor area, a quiet corner filled with old rugs and low beds for dogs who needed stillness more than commands. Emily ran it herself, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, voice calm and consistent. She trained dogs others had given up on and taught handlers how to listen instead of dominate. Rex became the center's anchor. He moved through the space with purpose, guiding younger dogs through routines, lying beside those who shook at sudden noises. When metal clanged, he tensed, but stayed. Every time, he stayed. Hannah Brooks visited often. She no longer looked like a student scrambling for footing. Her posture was surer now, her clothes sharper, her voice steadier. She had passed the bar 2 weeks earlier and accepted a position with a non-profit focused on veteran advocacy and civil rights. The work was exhausting. It suited her. "This place matters," she told Emily one afternoon, watching Rex gently nudge a nervous Belgian Malinois into following a simple command. "You're giving them back what the system takes." Emily smiled faintly. "We're reminding them who they are." The boy came on a Saturday. Tommy, older now by a season, cheeks fuller, fear replaced with determination, stood at the gate clutching a paper bag. His mother hovered a few steps behind, still cautious but trying. Tommy's eyes went straight to Rex. "He's here," Tommy said proudly, holding up the bag. For him, inside were treats, carefully chosen, soft. Rex approached slowly, lowering himself to sit at Tommy's level. When Tommy reached out, Rex stayed perfectly still. The boy laughed, a sound free of the hesitation that once held him back. Every week after that, Tommy returned. The town adjusted in small ways. People nodded now when Emily passed. Some stopped to talk. Others simply watched with something like respect. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but it no longer led. On a clear morning in early spring, Emily and Rex walked the same route they had taken months before. The park was thawing, patches of green pushing through melting snow. Birds called from bare branches. Emily walked without tension. Rex walked without scanning. They passed Mrs. Dalton's house. The curtains moved. This time, the door opened. "Morning," Mrs. Dalton said, uncertain but sincere. "Morning," Emily replied. Rex wagged his tail once. They continued on, side by side, footprints forming and remaining behind them instead of disappearing. The light had come late, but it had come. The lesson of this story is quiet but powerful. Not every wound is visible. Not every truth is loud. In everyday life, we often judge too quickly. trust the first version we hear, and move on without asking who might be hurt by our silence. Emily and Rex remind us that loyalty, discipline, and goodness do not disappear just because the world looks away. Sometimes the right thing to do is not dramatic. Sometimes it is simply standing still, staying calm, and refusing to become bitter when misunderstood. In our daily lives, we meet people carrying invisible scars. A coworker who seems distant, a neighbor who is avoided, a stranger who reacts differently because of what they have survived. This story asks us to pause before judging, to choose understanding over fear, and to protect those who cannot speak for themselves, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that honor still matters. Leave a comment and tell us what part touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach people who need hope. May God bless you and your family. May He protect those who serve, those who are healing, and those who feel forgotten. If you believe in justice, loyalty, and compassion, comment Amen.